أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Minute early, but we can do a quick revision before we get into it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a blessed gathering that brings us closer to Him, obviously through His kitab, and we've highlighted the importance, the constant importance of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and obviously this study that we're doing of Uloom al-Quran. And up until now, we've obviously covered a bit of a journey of the Quran. And we finished off last week with Tafseer. So we broke Tafseer into two parts. And we looked at Tafseer from a, we looked at it from how do the ulama come up with Tafseer? Or what's the process that they take in coming to deriving their meanings? And I'm not going to get into that, we've covered that a fair bit. And then we looked at some of the prominent tafsir in the past. Today we're looking at another two subjects that are very, very important when giving tafsir of the Quran, especially when the ulama, they get into the tafsir of the Quran, they take these next two sciences into consideration. Because it gives us a background into the verses that were the verses that were revealed. So the two subjects we're looking at today is Asbab al-Nuzul, so the causes of revelation, what caused revelation to happen, and then we're going to look at the Makki and Madani chapters as well. So sometimes the Quran will get certain chapters will get defined as a Makki chapter, a Madani chapter, which we're covering with Ustadh Khalid in our Tafsir class. So to start us off, on my notes, it's page 40. Might be different on your notes, but we'll go from this. We have the causes of revelation. Like I said, this topic is essential to understanding the tafsir of the Quran. Extremely essential, because it gives us a background in why that verse was revealed, which we'll get into. Obviously, the benefits of this topic. But traditionally, and not just traditionally, the ulama have broken up, especially this topic of Asbab al-Nuzul, the causes of revelation, into two. So, or the ayat, they split them into two in relation to this. So, ayat either had a sabab, they either had a cause, or they didn't have a cause. So not every ayah of the Quran is considered to have a cause of its revelation. But so this topic deals with those verses that did have a cause. What are they? Where do we derive that from? And also what sort of things would have prompted that revelation to happen. So we're looking at those verses that had a cause to them, inshallah. So there could have been a number of reasons why. Obviously, the Quran is a guidance for all mankind. So there's a number of reasons Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have revealed the Quran, which we have some ayat we actually have very clear. We have a very clear indication of why that ayah was sent down. But generally, the cause of the is for Allah, for whatever reason, would have revealed it. But in this case, generally the cause of revelation would be in response to an event or an incident that happened, or a question that was asked of the Prophet ﷺ, or just a general condition, maybe, which again falls into the event. But generally, there are 2 to 3 things where something has happened and the Quran sends down its guidance, or a question is asked of the Prophet ﷺ, or a companion, and that happens. So something, for instance, an example of an incident, there could have been something that happened in secret and no one else knew about it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down revelation because of that incident. And sometimes the Prophet ﷺ is asked a question, and in response to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the guidance for the Prophet ﷺ through the Quran. So that's generally what Asbab al-Nuzul are. Some famous or early works one of the earliest works in Asbab al-Nuzul. And this obviously goes back to the Sahaba as well. We need to keep that in mind, where they've said, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu said, he said, there isn't an ayah except I know where it was revealed and why it was revealed. That doesn't mean that, again, to clarify, it doesn't mean every ayah had a cause of revelation, but that's to say that whenever something had a cause of revelation, he knew it. So this is a science that goes back to the Sahaba, and the main source that we derive this from is actually from the Sahaba. So a tabi'i can't come and say the reason for that nuzul, or the reason for that ayah coming down is an event that he didn't witness, unless a Sahaba witnessed it. So this is very specific. Unless a Sahaba witnessed it, or the Prophet ﷺ said this is clearly why that is the purpose of that revelation, then no one can come afterwards and give a sabab for the nuzul, if that makes sense. So this is the primary source, and the only source is the time of the Prophet ﷺ, i.e. the companions. Some of the early works, like we mentioned, that can we say I think one of the first works we see is from Ali ibn al-Madini, and he's about 200 years or so after Hijrah, and he came up and he started to compile things. But the most prominent book, or the most, I guess, like we spoke about At-Tabari, as Tafseer being a reference point, a reference point for Tafseer. One of the key books, if not the key book, for Asbab al-Nuzul is the one that we have there, which is called Asbab al-Nuzul by Al-Wahidi. Again, he's about 400 or so years after Hijrah, and he compiled, it's not a huge book, but he compiled a book that looks at all the different verses, that have a reason or a cause for revelation. And he compiled, like we said, similar to At-Tabari, where he put a lot of information, a lot of the narrations in there. Later scholars came, including As-Suyuti, which we know clearly, the author of Al-Itqan, and he wrote another book. And a lot of scholars came afterwards and clarified some of the things. But again, we go back to him as a reference. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept his efforts. And he was a huge scholar. And you notice with a lot of the scholars that we've mentioned, or the tabi'in that we've mentioned, they're high ranked. He was considered one of the greatest scholars in his time, especially in the field of Tafsir and Quran. So they're not just any average scholar that comes up. They really focused on the sciences, and they focused on the importance of it. So it was at that time that they started to correlate these incidents, or some specific verses that had Asbab al-Nuzul. Actually, I hope that's clear. So we're going to look at some of the examples of some of the verses or some of the surah that had a clear, or we have a clear transmission of the cause happening. So the first one that we have over there on our notes is as an example is when the surah Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab was revealed. Very famous story, and we've all heard it so many times. And when the Prophet ﷺ went out, and this is mentioned. My mistake. I'll give that one later. But the one that we have over here is when Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, was passing away. Sorry, that's my correction. When he was passing away, and the Prophet ﷺ went in to see him, and he was on his deathbed, and Abu Jahl and Abdullah ibn Abi Umayyah were in there. And it's his uncle, he loved him, and we know the importance of Abu Talib in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The year that he passed away is the same year that our mother passed away, Khadija radiallahu anha. And it was a very sorrowful year, because the Prophet ﷺ lost both his comfort from a home and spiritual and personal perspective, and his protection from his enemies in the same year. So it was a very hard time for the Prophet ﷺ. So when Abu Talib's on his deathbed, the Prophet ﷺ walks in and he tries to, my uncle, please just at least say the words. And I'm putting this in my words, obviously, but we get the understand. Just say the words, La ilaha illallah. So at least I have an excuse to testify for you on the day of judgment. And subhanAllah, out of his maybe pride or whatever you want to call it, in front of Abu Jahl and the other, he refused to give the shahada. And then the Prophet ﷺ made the remark more or less to the meaning that I'll keep asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive him, and I'll invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness, and I'll constantly invoke it until I'm prohibited to do so. And then on this occasion, the revelation came down that it's not befitting for the Prophet ﷺ or any of the believers to ask for forgiveness for the idolaters. So that's a clear cause. We have that in the hadith. So it's a clear cause of why that verse was revealed. So we have now an indication of, okay, when I read that verse, I know why that was revealed, and we have a semi-tafsir of why it was revealed. Another example is Surah Al-Ikhlas, which we read maybe more often, probably the most second recited surah after the Fatiha. So we read it so often. And this was, again, this had a sabab, this had a reason for its revelation. So the reason for this surah's revelation, and a lot of us will probably be very aware with this, is when the Prophet ﷺ was asked by some of the idolaters to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they say, describe your Lord. Idolaters, they come up with some of their silly ideas, especially in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So when they asked him to describe their Lord to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down Surah Al-Ikhlas. Just قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ إلى آخره. So that's another surah that has a cause for its revelation. So again, there's an incident that happened, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to that incident on behalf of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have a few others which we can mention. When there was the one I mentioned earlier, we had when the surah Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab, when the Prophet ﷺ went out to when the Prophet ﷺ is again a very famous one. The Prophet ﷺ went out and he was calling the people, and he said, if there's would you believe me if I said there's an army over the mountain? I said, yes, we'll believe you. And then he said, well, I'm warning you about so and so, about the day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and warning you about the day that we will stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then as soon as he said that, Abu Lahab yelled out, you've called us for this, may your hands be. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded with Tabbat Yada, that your hands be. Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab. So that was a response, that was an incident that took place, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down. That, and in relation to that verse, I'll come, especially when we look at the benefits, that can be a disbenefit to individuals as well. Another one was the prohibition of alcohol. The prohibition of alcohol is one, but the other one is also when the Sahaba asked about, and they were having a discussion after alcohol had been prohibited, and they started to feel a bit of concern for their companions that had passed away, especially those that had been martyred in battle prior to the prohibition of alcohol. So when they were having this discussion with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they asked, what about those that have been martyred in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And they drank alcohol. So, subhanAllah, it was one of the later prohibitions of alcohol. So we hear many stories of Sahaba that still drank alcohol, and some of the prominent Sahaba that would drink alcohol because it hadn't been prohibited. It was one of the later things that, subhanAllah, had been prohibited in the life of the Sahaba. So on this particular instance, they wanted to know, so after it had been prohibited, and they asked, well, what about our companions that had been martyred in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verses, لَيْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ جُنَاحٌ فيما طعموا إذا ما اتقوا وآمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ثم اتقوا وآمنوا ثم اتقوا وأحسنوا والله يحب المحسنين. As in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 93, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now revealed that as a to let them know that if something hadn't been prohibited, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to take them to account on that. So that's a good example of a question being asked and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that being a cause of the revelation. Another one, we mentioned them, they're good to have, and especially because we read a lot of the Quran. I'll mention a few more, and they're just good examples, and it's going to go back to we're looking at the benefits of knowing Asbab al-Nuzul. Another example is when there was a couple of Jewish people walking past the Prophet ﷺ, and they were sort of prompting each other to say, well, ask him a question. And they came up with the question, they asked him the question about, or ask him about the spirit, ask him about the ruh. And they asked the Prophet ﷺ, in the narration, he looked up to the sky and he kept quiet for a bit. And then the narrator of that was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and he said, I knew the Prophet ﷺ was getting revelation in the surah, in the ayah, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. So that verse came down about the ruh, an explanation of the ruh, that you're asking about something that you already know. Allah, it's a knowledge, it's ilm al-ghayb, so it's a knowledge of the unseen. And the last example that we'll use is the Qibla change. And this one's good to highlight because it shows us the importance of Asbab al-Nuzul, in the sense of, I can take an ayah, or any individual can pick up the Quran and say, well, I read that and linguistically it means 1, 2, 3, 4, or I can apply it however I want. But if you don't know the cause of that revelation, then you can actually be you can come up with a very unintended meaning. So obviously the Qibla changed for the Prophet ﷺ, and we know the Prophet ﷺ loved very dearly the Kaaba. And obviously when he had to leave, so when he would pray sallallahu alaihi wasallam in front of the Kaaba, he would pray on the side where it faced the Kaaba but also faced Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the Kaaba, or sorry, was the Qibla prior to the revelation of the Kaaba being the new Qibla. So the Prophet ﷺ had this in him when he migrated, and he Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew it was in him. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, when he knew about this, and the revelation came, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. If someone takes that, and that was in response to, there was a group of Sahaba that didn't know, that were praying to the wrong direction, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent it down to inform them. No, sorry, my correction. It was revealed, sorry, that's my correction. It was revealed in response to travelers that were traveling and they didn't know which way the Qibla was. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then revealed that if you don't know where the Qibla is, then anywhere that you face, you can find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from that, what we take is, or what we can take is, if I take that verse linguistically and I take that verse at face value, not knowing that, then I could say, well, I never need to face the Qibla because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everywhere, so why do I need the Qibla? But we all know part of an accepted salat is, if you know where the Qibla is, then you must face it. Otherwise, if you do it out of arrogance, or you do it out of, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everywhere, then it's a shortcoming in our prayer. So if someone took that literally and didn't know that the cause of this revelation was that if you're a traveler and you don't know where it is, which way the Qibla is, then you can face whichever direction. And some of the other tafsirs on that is that maybe it's a person that's on there, but the cause of it was that instance. But they take the variation that if someone's on their mount, or was on their camel back then, a traveling device, which is a horse or a camel, or whatever, then there's the leniency of you don't have to sort of face that way. Wallahu a'lam. Some of the benefits of knowing the cause of revelation, which we've highlighted, is a proper understanding. So one of the benefits is to know the proper understanding of the verse, to have a proper and clear understanding of that verse, so that we don't get misled, as the example that we just gave in the instance of the Qibla. Another one will be understanding the circumstances of the revelation. So why was that revealed? And sometimes revelation came specifically for individuals. And this was an honor amongst the Sahaba. So for instance, if a verse came down to honor or came down because of that Sahaba, then that Sahaba would have an honor. The Quran came down for me. And subhanAllah, the one that came to my head now, and there's many examples. And I also said it could be a dishonor. And the dishonor clearly in Abu Lahab. So it's very clear that you are dishonored. You were the cause of that revelation and you'll be dishonored. So it's not always that was the cause of revelation, so the person's honored. Abu Lahab is dishonored. And forever. But he was the cause of that revelation. But another instance is the cousin or the relative of the Prophet ﷺ in Abasa wa Tawalla. The blind man approached the Prophet ﷺ, which was his relative, and the Prophet ﷺ frowned. And I'm not going to go into the tafsir, inshallah, he covered that with Ustadh Khalid. But the Prophet ﷺ would say that every time he's seen that relative, he would honor him, and he would say, "You're the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected my character with more or less to the meaning." SubhanAllah. And he gives us also the proper application of a verse. So the four things, just to make it clear, is a proper understanding of the verse, to give us a proper understanding of the verse, to understand the circumstances of that revelation, to give us a proper application of that verse. So how do we properly apply that verse? And the last one is to know the person who was the cause of that revelation. And like we said, the Sahaba took that as an honor, that so-and-so verse was revealed with because of me. And Umar radiallahu anhu, we know many instances where Umar radiallahu anhu, he would say, on this occasion, my Lord agreed with my opinion. When he'd given an opinion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send revelation in accordance with that. So, Allahu alam. So that's the causes of revelation. That's the causes of revelation, which we call Asbabun Nuzul. From there, we go to the next chapter, which is Makki and Madani. The Makki verses, or the Makki chapters and Madani chapters. In relation to this also, like we said, it further elaborates the understanding of verses and surah. It's important to note the Prophet ﷺ didn't really distinguish between these. Again, there's no clear hadith that says the Prophet ﷺ said this is a Madani chapter or this is a Makki chapter. It was more later on the Sahaba and the ones that came after them that said that preserved this knowledge for our understanding of Tafseer of the Quran. So how do we determine, and we'll see, when any of us pick up a Mus'haf or have covered any Tafsir, they'll say this chapter is a Makki chapter or this chapter is a Madani chapter. What determines that being Makki or Madani? We look at time. So it goes down to the time. And the defining factor of which time we look at is the Hijrah. So anything that was revealed before the time of Hijrah, is considered a Makki chapter or Makki verses. And it doesn't matter where it was revealed. If it was revealed prior to the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, then it is Makki. If it was revealed after the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ to Medina, then it is considered Madani. It doesn't matter where that revelation came down. So if revelation came down after that period, for instance, in Fatah Makkah, and the Prophet ﷺ was back in Makkah, or Hudaybiyah, for instance, which is much closer to Makkah, it's still considered Madani verses. How do we classify? So I have to say we look at that from a time. It's when classifying Makki and Madani, the factor is time, and the event is the Hijrah that distinguishes between which time. Okay, so it's not the place. You can't say the Makki chapter that was revealed near Makkah. That's not the case. The case, and this is the most dominant opinion. There is other opinions. The most dominant opinion is that time period. That is whatever was revealed after the Hijrah is Madani, and what was revealed prior to the Hijrah is Makki. We don't look at specific verses. We do not look at specific verses, even though some specific verses might be Makki or Madani. We look at the chapter as a whole. We look at the chapter as a whole to define it as that is a Madani chapter, or that is a Madani surah, or that is a Makki surah. Okay? When I say that's the defining, a chapter could have been completely revealed in Makki, so it's completely a Makki. So there's four categories. Let's break it up into four classifications. Completely brought down in, or completely revealed in Makkah, so before the Hijrah, so in that Makki period, completely revealed in that Makki period. And an example of this is Ya Ayyuhal Muddathir. Okay, completely the whole verse, the whole surah was revealed in Makki, so it's a completely, it's still considered a Makki surah. Another clarification is it could be a Makki surah if its majority was revealed prior to Hijrah. So it's in the Makki classification, and its majority. It might have some verses within it that were revealed in the Madani phase, but it is still considered a Makki chapter. And an example of this is Surah Al-A'raf. And the same, the opposite for Madani. So an entire surah might have been revealed in the Madani phase, which is an example of that is Surah Ali Imran. The whole surah was revealed in the Madani phase of the classification. And an example of a surah that is considered Madani, but the majority of it, and it had some ayat in it that were Makki, is Surah Al-Hajj. So there's a classification. So its entirety could be revealed in that phase. So it's classified as that, or its majority is revealed in that phase for Makkah and Madani. Inshallah, if there's any questions, we can post them up. Hopefully we'll have a bit of time to go through them at the end. Again, the way that we determine whether it's Makki or Madani is there needs to be something indicating that it was sent down from the Hadith of Sunnah. Okay, that clarifies from the Sahaba that say that ayah or that surah was revealed in that time. But in saying that, there is certain characteristics of chapters and ayat that I consider that help us determine whether it was this or that, but they're not it's highly likely. Let's say that highly likely, but there is exceptions in that regard. There are exceptions in that regard. So the main characteristics or the main indicators of Makki chapters are, and we've got them listed there, but I'll go through them, is if there's a sajda tilawa in it. Sajda tilawa in it, so we know the verses of prostration. If that's in it, then that's an indication that it's a Makki chapter. If it contains the words kalla in it, then that is also considered to be a verse or a surah that is from the Makki phase. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us as Ya Bani Adam, so O children of Adam, then it's considered Makki. The fourth one, if it contains the phrase O mankind, and not O you who believe. So if he says Ya ayyuhan nas, and Ya Bani Adam. So there too, as opposed to, O you who believe. And we look at that. If it contains stories of prophets from previous nations. So generally, if a surah contains prophets from previous nations, then it's considered to be from the Makki phase, except Surah Al-Baqarah. Except Surah Al-Baqarah. So like we said, there's certain exceptions. Exception being when those stories are in Surah Al-Baqarah. Every story, every chapter that contains the story of Adam and Shaitan is considered Makki, with the exception of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is in line with the previous point. And the last one is every surah that contains the huruf al-muqatta'at, so the separated letters such as alif, lam, mim, etc. Then this is considered from the Makki period, except Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Ali Imran, and there are different opinions on Surah Al-Ra'd. From the Madani chapters, now we look at what characteristics do they have. Anything that looks at the rulings, so the legal rulings, punishments, had inheritance law, and anything like that. And you can already start to see the clear defining factors. Prior to Hijrah, the Muslims didn't have much power. The Prophet didn't have much power. Now he's in Medina. They've created an Islamic state. Now laws are starting to be implemented. Prior to that, there wasn't implementation of law. It's a lot of it's more of the motivating verses. It's more the Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeping giving the Sahaba that motivation. Now we're in the Madani phase of things. Laws are starting to be implemented, and the verses that are coming down are a lot more precise to how to run laws and that sort of thing. When he addresses the people of the book, more times than often, then that's considered a Madani verse. Obviously, there wasn't as many in the time that the Prophet was dealing with the idolaters. He wasn't dealing with the people of the book. So when he starts to address the people of the book, Ya Ahlul Kitab, then that's more of a Madani chapter. When he discusses the hypocrites, in Makki there wasn't any hypocrites. And the Muslims, there was no motivation to be a Muslim other than the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Makki period of things. So it wouldn't have made sense to be a hypocrite, to get prosecuted, to get tortured. It didn't make sense. So we didn't see hypocrites in the Makki before Hijrah. When we get to Medina and the Prophet is now in power and in control, then you start to see the emergence of these hypocrites, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warning the Prophet about the hypocrites. Again, with the exception of Surah Al-Ankabut, which is a Makki chapter. And every chapter that discusses jihad and its rulings is considered a Makki chapter. Allahu A'lam. Why do we need to know Makki and Madani? Some of the benefits that have been given to us it explains the Quran. We just got a very brief understanding of some of the defining factors, but it helps us. It helps explain the Quran that it was revealed in this time. Again, if you link that with Asbab al-Nuzul, you understand the circumstances of the Muslims. You understand what the Prophet was going through at that time. So it gives a clear indication. It gives a clearer indication of what is meant by those verses. It's a big benefit in the Nasikh and Mansukh, which we haven't covered. We'll cover next week. But those verses that their rulings have been removed, obviously we'll go into that next week, but it plays a key role in that. Another big one, it helps with da'wah. It's a big help in da'wah. How did the Prophet ﷺ give da'wah to the people in Mecca as opposed to the people in Medina? The people of Mecca were idolaters, like we said. How was the da'wah towards them as opposed to the da'wah towards people that already believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as they claim? And how do you address them? It helps build a stronger community of believers, in the sense of now the Madani verses are starting to build that, and the Makki verses is building that encouragement and that brotherhood, etc. It helps understand the Seerah. So it helps us understand what was happening in the Seerah, what revelations were coming down, how much revelation was coming down, etc. In relation to the Nasikh and Mansukh, but on a different point is the progression of rulings. So how were rulings implemented? And also in relation to that, which is the last point, we know the history of the implications, the implementations of Islamic law also. So there's some of the key benefits. So explains the Quran, helps with Nasikh and Mansukh, it helps with the da'wah, helps with a strong Muslim community, helps with understanding the Seerah, the progression of rulings, seeks and know the history of the implementation of Islamic law. I will finish off with the number of chapters that are Makki and the number of chapters that are from Medina. There's a lot more chapters. There's a lot more chapters that are Makki. So out of the, how many surah do I have in the Quran? 114? I think it's 114. Correct, it's 114. I have 114 surah in the Quran. From the 114, we have 86 that are considered Makki verses. And just keep in mind, this is going off the preferred opinion. There is differentiation of opinions on how many, is that a Makki or is it Madani? But let's go off what the majority are. So if 86 are Makki, that makes 28 Madani. But generally, the Makki verses are short, precise, and to the point, a lot more elegant. Wallahu a'lam. Elegant because you're dealing with the Arabs. So you get that beautiful depth of Arabic explained. Whereas the Madani, it's just clear laws being implemented, etc. And like we said, the Madani verses or chapters are 28. And to finish off, an easy way to remember that is in Surah Al-Baqarah, we have 286 verses in Surah Al-Baqarah. To remember how many Makki verses or Makki chapters, if we remove the 2 from 286, we're left with 86. So 86 are Makki verses, Makki chapters. And if we remove the 6 from the end, we're left with 28. So 28 are Madani chapters. Wallahu a'lam. Inshallah, that was clear. Inshallah, that was clear. I'll do a very quick revision as I've got 3 minutes. So what we went over is the causes of revelation. And we looked at not all verses have a cause, but those that have a cause are generally in response to a question or an event that took place. And we looked at some of the examples in that. And one of the key resources for that being Al-Wahidi's kitab, called Asbab al-Nuzul. And we looked at some of the, I guess, the benefits in knowing that. And although the one that I really like is, it gives us a clear understanding of the verse. Well, you can't, and like we said, this is obviously goes back to giving tafsir. If you don't know it, then you can't just take, and like we said, subhanAllah, the Arabic language being the last form of giving tafsir of the Quran, every other one takes precedence before that. So whether it's the Quran, the Quran, the Sunnah, etc. Then we looked at the verses that are Makki and Madani, and that's defined via time. The time being anything prior to the Hijrah and anything after the Hijrah. Just to be very clear, if anyone is thinking of the question, what if something came down, if revelation came down on the Hijrah, the defining in that period is when the Prophet ﷺ reached Medina. So the Hijrah is still considered part of the Makki aspect of it. And we looked at some key characteristics of what the Makki verses look like, as what do the Madani verses look like. Allahu a'lam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to understand these. And let him make it, inshallah, or may he make it a cause of us to get nearer to his book and to understand his book and his words more precisely, so it has an internal internal and external effect on us. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka